Did the CIA have a hand in the murder of John F. Kennedy, an American president? And here's the reply we received verbatim. Quote, "The answer is yes. I believe they were involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake." Americans have trusted their government less with every passing year since the killing of John F. Kennedy.
People in authority will abuse every power that we relinquish to them.
What's up, guys? It's your boy, Benny. You hear a lot these days about the killing of democracy. Republicans are killing democracy. They're destroying democracy. But what about actually killing democracy? Like killing the leader of a country in order to get your preferred political results? Well, that's only happened once in recent history. It happened in 1963. It happened in Dallas, Texas, and it was with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Nobody quite knows why that assassination occurred, and nobody quite understands the process and the sequencing around that assassination. And in fact, everybody who could understand it or was involved in it or was involved in the potential cover-ups have all died at this point, and the government still refuses to release the documents, even though they've been told to do so by Congress. When Donald Trump tried to do it, he said his hands were tied. Who's tying Donald Trump's hands? What an interesting question. In every single crime, you have to ask yourself, motive. Who benefits? Cui bono in Latin. Who would benefit by the murder of John F. Kennedy? Well, John F. Kennedy was a president who has a military background. He understood intelligence services, and John F. Kennedy had just been completely destroyed by the CIA and their botched invasion of Cuba, something called the Bay of Pigs. John F. Kennedy had said privately he wished to scatter the CIA to the winds, and that he wanted to, in a second term, truly undo the national security state, which he saw as a cancer and as an unelected government over our government. And so John F. Kennedy was an enemy of the national security state, an enemy of the deep state, you might say. And so perhaps that would be a motivation. We're not quite sure, but somebody who is sure is John F. Kennedy's nephew who's running for president. His name is Robert Kennedy Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr. tweeting moments ago, "Here's a picture of me and my uncle, whose wisdom affected me profoundly. Today, these words are especially relevant. A nation that is afraid to let its people judge truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that is afraid of its people." Now, who is afraid of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Well, the CIA is. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is now openly blaming the CIA for the assassination of his uncle JFK and claims that it is beyond a reasonable doubt. He did this in a radio interview that we will play for you right now.
Let me ask you a question. I mean, I've never asked you this before. Who do you think really killed your uncle?
Well, I think there's overwhelming evidence that the CIA was involved in this murder. I think it's beyond a reasonable doubt at this point. People, who question that, I'll tell you the book, a book that probably distills the millions of documents of evidence, including confessions of people who were involved in the crime and the 60-year cover-up. The best kind of distillation of that is a book called The Unspeakable by Jim Douglas. And I, of course, read probably 100 books on the subject.
Let me ask you one more question.
I recommend that book is the best.
I've said publicly and on the radio that the same people that killed your uncle killed Martin Luther King and killed your father.
Well, in terms of my father's death, in terms of my uncle's death, the evidence is overwhelming that the CIA was involved in the murder and the cover-up. The evidence of the CIA involvement in my father's death is very convincing, but it's circumstantial. We do not have the really strong documentary and testimonial evidence that we have in my uncle, but the best evidence suggests that my father was killed by Eugene Thanksgiving. Sirhan fired his shots. He fired 8 shots, 2 of them toward my father. One of them hit Paul Schrade, who was my father's friend and a UAW leader. The second shot he fired at my father hit the door jamb behind my father and was later removed by the police. Sirhan was then pounced upon by 6 men and bent over the steam table, and his firing arm was directed away from my father. But Rayford Johnson said he had superhuman strength. They could not get the pistol away from him, so he emptied the barrel, he emptied the chamber.
This is obviously the kind of stuff that cannot be let out of the can. This is kind of stuff that cannot be allowed to be aired in public. It will create uncomfortable questions for those people in charge. Once again, I am still in shock that I looked this up and it's true. Donald Trump had the legal authority to release all documents related to the JFK assassination from 70 years ago. Everyone who was involved in it is dead by now, either murdered at the hand of a government agent or murdered mysteriously inside of a jail cell. Jeffrey Epstein, anyone? But here we have a situation where Donald Trump himself, in 2017, when he had the legal authority given to him by Congress to release all documents, said his hands were tied. He couldn't do it. What does that mean? White House contender RFK says there is overwhelming evidence of a CIA cover-up. Kennedy has previously cited the links between the CIA and Lee Harvey Oswald, which are true. Nobody denies that. Lee Harvey Oswald was a trained foreign agent via the CIA. He said he was running because he felt the party had been stolen by neocons. And by neocons there, RFK is essentially saying the people who are in favor of the super security state and in favor of the people who potentially did this to his uncle. So this is a really great motivation to run for office. This isn't the only time that these allegations have been floated in public on a massive platform. Tucker Carlson asked these questions of a former CIA operative, a high-functioning member of the CIA, in a recent interview. Watch.
We spoke to someone who had access to these still hidden CIA documents, a person who was deeply familiar with what they contain. We asked this person directly, did the CIA have a hand in the murder of John F. Kennedy, an American president? And here's the reply we received verbatim. Quote, the answer is yes. I believe they were involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake. It's hard to imagine a more jarring response than that. Again, this is not a, quote, conspiracy theorist that we spoke to. Not even close. This is someone with direct knowledge of the information that once again is being withheld from the American public. And the answer we received was unequivocal. Yes, the CIA was involved in the assassination of the president.
For his part, RFK Jr. has been making the media rounds. RFK Jr. was on Fox stating that the powers that be wish to silence him. Fact check, true. Joe Biden has announced that he will not be engaging in any primary debates and that he may not even put his name on the ballot in New Hampshire and Iowa. What? What does that mean? This is wild. We are in for wild times, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to RFK Jr. state definitively and correctly that the powers in our government wish to silence him because he knows too much.
Okay, you said the evidence is overwhelming and beyond any reasonable doubt that the CIA was involved in the killing of your uncle, a U.S. president. What is the evidence?
Well, there's millions of pages of documents, of CIA documents, of transcripts, of recorded conversations from the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. It's hard to summarize the evidence. There are, as I said in that podcast, there are confessions of people who were directly involved in the plot, who were involved in the planning of the plot, who were peripheral to the plot. There's a 60-year cover-up. The Warren Commission was run by Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired, and then insinuated himself onto the Warren Commission and essentially ran the Warren Commission and kept this evidence from the Warren Commissioners. Either way, when Congress, 10 years later, investigated the crime with much more evidence than the Warren Commission had at its disposal, Congress found that, yeah, it was a plot. It was a conspiracy. There were multiple people involved. And most of the people in that investigation believe that it was the CIA that was behind it, because the evidence was so overwhelming to them.
The magic bullet never made any sense to me. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, none of it made any. I mean, Jack Ruby, even when I was a little boy, Sean, I was in the White House. My uncle was, laying at rest in the East Room, being waked. And I was standing in the main foyer of the White House with my Aunt Jackie Kennedy and my father and my mother. And President Johnson came in and told us that Lee Harvey Oswald had just been killed by Jack Ruby. And and I said to my mom at that point, I turned to her and I said, why did he kill him? Did he love our family? Well, that's a lingering question. What was Jack Ruby doing there? My father, when he investigated Jack Ruby, he found out that Jack Ruby had been deeply involved with Carlos Marcella's mob, with Sam Giancana, and all the people who were all of those mob leaders, Santos Traficante, who were the Havana casino owners, who had been recruited by the CIA in the Castro murder plot. So they were all working together in cahoots with the CIA. By the way, the day that my uncle was killed, I was picked up at Sidwell Friends School and brought home. The first phone call that my father made after J. Edgar Hoover told him that his brother had been shot was to the CIA desk officer in Langley, who was only a mile from our house.
Yeah.
And my father said to him, did your people do this? His next call was to Harry Ruiz, who was one of the Cuban Bay of Pigs leaders who had remained very, very close to our family and to my father. My father asked him the same question. Then my father called John McComb, who was the head of the CIA, and asked him to come to the house. McComb came over, and when I came home from Sidwell Friends School, my father was walking in the yard with John McComb, and my father was posing the same question to him. Was it our people who did this to my brother? So it was my father's first instinct that the agency had killed his brother.